Morning, Deirdre.
Good morning, Tom. How are you today?
I think I'm in northern New England.
I believe that's right. That combination of evergreens and color looks like Maine, perhaps. But yes, a beautiful scene.
Yes, this was taken actually this week, not
Yeah.
by me, by somebody else, but it is spectacular. The best time to be in New England.
Yes, it is.
Best time to be in New England. The weekly brief.
Weekly brief.
And we're going to talk about Starlink.
Yes. And remember what our weekly briefs are. They're in-depth looks at the topics that we've been talking about in our general videos, uh, tending toward the how do you accomplish what we've been talking about generally. And
Yep.
remember the context of what we've been talking about generally. It's the organizing structure underlying the navigate the now theme. And this organizing structure has its three parts: assess, decide, and accomplish. Now, interestingly enough, the topic of, I think of it as Star Wars, as SpaceX, you say Starlink, because we're thinking about it in different aspects. I thought about using this as a topic the moment I saw the capture of the rocket returning to Earth by the
Hmm.
pincers. And that led to the train of thought about how NASA is using SpaceX. You have a slightly broader sense of it, but in an interesting way. I'm going to talk about it from the point of view of assess and decide. Those are the first two parts of our organizing structure. And then turn it over to you to talk about the accomplish aspects, which accomplish being the third aspect. And the way I started to think about this topic, again, I saw not only the capture of the rocket returning to Earth, but also, I believe it was the next day or 2 days after that, SpaceX provided the booster for the Jupiter mission, the mission to go out and explore one of Jupiter's moons. And I started to think that SpaceX is starting to take up an awful lot of NASA work. Remember that SpaceX is going to go up and bring those two stranded astronauts back to Earth also, and so forth. And I was thinking, how did we get in this situation? Because I remember when NASA was known as the absolute avant-garde of space travel, of space work, that they put together this tremendous technology team. They were doing everything. They were exploring here. They were running projects all over the place. And now clearly they've entered into some sort of public-private partnership with SpaceX. And how did this come about? And this is in relation to our organizing structure, part of the whole assess and decide. So, assessing this situation, what's going on here? Is it that NASA has lost its edge and cannot do some of this space work? Is it because NASA has too much infrastructure carried over from its early days of existence and so forth? Is it that NASA can no longer move that quickly because it's become so bureaucratic? Is it a matter of funds? Is this temporary, or is this going to be the ongoing situation from now on? That is NASA going to be what I'll call the base, with companies like SpaceX doing the actual work out there, building on a NASA infrastructure? So we're trying to figure out the situation now. How in the world did SpaceX become such an important part of NASA? More to the point, how did NASA make the decision that it needed to work with SpaceX? And my guess is some of aspects of the things I was just talking about, that NASA had infrastructure in place, it had people in place, but was not able to move forward and do some of these new types of work that SpaceX is coming out with. Therefore, for NASA to accomplish some of the space tasks of today, it needed to establish some sort of partnership. And the most obvious entity was SpaceX. Now, remember, that they also established a partnership with Boeing. It was Boeing that delivered the astronauts out there, but Boeing ran into a failure. The ship that was supposed to bring the astronauts home sprung a leak. So they weren't going to risk the astronauts in this. The ship came home itself, and Boeing is trying to figure that out in and amongst Boeing's other troubles. So Boeing maybe have become not the first choice partner here, but SpaceX has been delivering for a long time. It's been how many years since the first mission? Is it 5, 6 years or so since the very
Oh
first,
my
or the
gosh, I
first
think it may
manned
be even
mission
longer.
or something?
Yeah.
It's a long time. So what we have now is somehow, and I don't know the decision process, but NASA has decided to allow SpaceX to do a lot of its work, both serving as a booster rocket, as driving manned mission, I should say personed missions, doing things like recovering of astronauts and so forth. I don't know that this is a joint venture. I believe that there's no, or as far as I know, there's no transfer of funds from NASA to SpaceX. And in fact, funding may be one of the reasons why NASA had to go to a private entity like SpaceX. But clearly, it's a partnership of sorts that's going to exist and expand as more and more space exploration gets done. Now, what's interesting to me is to take this forward into a general, how do leaders get things done? That there are a lot of technologies being thrown at leaders right now, and leaders may or may not have the capability to move into these technologies. These technologies are not as simple as downloading a software program, although heaven knows the way you hear some people talk about it, it's sort of like, do Gen I just download our program? It's sort of like, stop. Any business has to do a lot of work around something like this process, personnel, ability to accomplish, funding. Note that these are the same things that I was mentioning when I was talking about how NASA decided to go and work with SpaceX. Is this a model for leaders going forward into some of these new technologies that maybe they build internally, but maybe they can't build internally or they don't want to build internally? So is this a model for doing things like, and I'll pick a big one here, quantum computing. We all know that quantum computing is getting closer and closer. In fact, Columbia Business School is running a webinar next week talking about how companies can start to look at using quantum computing. It's getting that close. But most companies, one, can't get quantum engineers. There aren't that many in the world. And two, can't afford the equipment. The big computers who can do this can't run the projects. These projects take different sorts of um, not only people and personnel, but also processes underlying them. So if a company is going to move into quantum computing, is it going to be that it has to establish some sort of partnership with people who can do this quantum computing? The same thing actually may be said about Gen AI, that a lot of companies probably, once they get down to figuring out a strategy around the use of Gen AI, start to realize how much has to be done for the company to use Gen AI in a business effective way. Now, I think you and I, Tom, know that Gen AI is not ready for a real business use. It's maybe getting closer though. But when companies feel comfortable moving in that direction, think in terms of the things we've been talking about: personnel, affordability, processes. How do you actually execute this thing? Is it possible that companies wanting to move into this technology actually have to partner with other people? And then when you start to get into this, you start to get into one of the things you and I always talk about. This is one of our three assessed questions. Are the motivations aligned? Now, my guess is that NASA, looking at SpaceX, felt comfortable enough with the alignment of motivations to go ahead and work with them. And frankly, it has proven out that the motivations by and large are the same, even though one is a government entity and one is a private entity. The motivations for space exploration, space science are aligned. But let's go to a company that is thinking about doing, say, quantum computing or even Gen AI work. Who do they partner with to do this? It might logically be said that maybe one of the tech companies like Microsoft or Google or someone like that. But then you get to the question of motivations and choice and what sorts of projects could you do? Would the leader of the company have the strategic flexibility to do what is right by the company? Or if they go into a partnership with one of these tech companies, would they be forced to use the technology in terms of what that company wants them to do? And that becomes a strategic problem for them. So maybe some of this, unless the motivation issue is worked out and solved, maybe this is not that sort of possibility. It's not a NASA SpaceX situation. It's a NASA with a company that may not be aligned in terms of motivation. One might then think about some of the big consulting companies like, say, Deloitte or Ernst& Young or Price Waterhouse and so forth, who say that they work in terms of what their customers want. But even so, the way that these companies work is they have their solutions that they bring to the companies. And yes, these solutions may be customized for the companies, but still you have the questions of motivation and whether the customization will allow the strategic flexibility that a company needs. So maybe or maybe not, this becomes a model for a company wanting to get into technology. Maybe a slightly different thing has to happen. Maybe two companies with complementary services or complementary tech capabilities form some sort of partnership to accomplish this work. So this is something that leaders have to start to think through as they get into this. What does it mean for their strategy, for the capabilities of the company, for decision making, and for delivering results, for them to try to implement a technology that they may not be familiar with? NASA and SpaceX provide one way to do it, and an assessment and a decision parts of our organizing structure say that this was a good decision, but this may not be a model that other companies can use when trying to do the same sort of thing. And at this point, I'm going to stop, take a breath, and turn it over to you to start talking about the third part of this, the accomplish aspect of it.
So when you think about uh, this situation, and I set it up badly for you because I went directly to Starlink instead of staying up at the top at SpaceX because I forgot that that's where you're going to start.
Yeah.
But when you think about some of the commonalities of what's going on here, because one of the things that it starts with is what defines success for your organization? And when we look at and the person involved here is Elon Musk, for good or bad. Some people love him, some people don't love him. Some people think he's doing incredible work. Some people don't think he's doing incredible work. But we're not trying to make a judgment of good or bad. We're trying to analyze the situation and see what is it telling us. So one of the things when you ask, and I know this because I've seen him articulate this a number of different times, but he's consistent in what he defines as success for himself. And you can tell it translates to success in his businesses, which is a whole different topic that you and I are going to take on separately, is how do you see personal success and business success, and are they completely different or are they very aligned? In his case, I believe they're highly aligned.
Yes.
the things that he says are that the most important thing for him every single day is to get things done. It's just to accomplish things and to deliver something. Now, that thing for him is frequently um, a piece of hardware, actually, that functions and provides productivity of some sort and useful productivity. But he also says that an aspect is also a service or a product that may not be physical. If you think about that, that's the first thing. It has to be getting things done. Secondly, at scale. He's very clear about it being at scale. And then third, that he has that as a result of that, it has a major influence on something. Now, he doesn't say this, but I believe that you could, and you helped me with the words here earlier. I think he would say that he wants to get things done every day that are scalable and have a major influence on humanity.
Mhm.
And he wants it to be on the long-term sustainability and quality of life of humanity. And I know that's a big ask, right? I mean, that is a huge ask. When you and I say, look, all we're trying to do is help leaders figure out how to deal with the digital age, right? And build their
Right.
organizations around digital age issues. Um, I believe that's that. So now, if you think about accomplish, let's look at what is the commonality of what he's doing. Well, clearly it's technology, but one of the things you see, it's his use of computing, and it's his use of computing at the very edge. Now, for him, it's supercomputing. It's NVIDIA, and he just made a major accomplishment with NVIDIA computers that even the CEO of NVIDIA said it would took him. I'm not even going to give you the numbers, but it's astounding how fast he was able to make use of a series of computers that they said even they would have a hard time matching the speed. But think about his businesses: autonomous driving, robotics, Neuralink, SpaceX, and then an offshoot from SpaceX is Starlink.
Mhm.
They all share a requirement for supercomputing, for aspects of the advanced use of technology and data. We were even leaving out the communication platform that he's dealing with for, I think, a separate reason.
Mhm.
Um, I think he would say it's more the quality of life rather than the sustainability of the life. Um, but he's doing this because of his definition of what he believes is his measure of success of accomplishment. Now,
Mhm.
notice you and I, he does use the word goals, but we're trying to break that thinking a little bit because we think that goals it harkens back to the era of the industrial age, and even before that, in the age of developing organizations, which goes back into World War I and all those sorts of things, and even back into the Roman and Greek times of pulling together groups of people to accomplish things. But and usually in those days, it was war of some form.
Yes.
Uh, but but we try to break that loose to mean success, so that it's not just a goal, but the objective or goal is based on how you define success for whatever it is, your personal success or the organization's success. So when I look at Elon Musk, and I'm looking over here because I know I keep my notes on the right, and I keep, as you're going, I'm keeping and looking for things. One of the things I think we haven't seen him do yet is much work in quantum computing, and that's because we really don't have yet. And as you were talking, I just checked quickly to make sure I was right about this. Right? So that's why you saw me looking down, doing a little bit of searching. We don't have a good operating system yet, a
Mhm.
good functional operating system yet for quantum computing. That's been part of the issue, even with the IBM platform that allows people to experiment and learn. You're still doing it at a level of what you and I might think of as, um, being back at machine language programming rather than using a language,
Right.
like Python or any of the others that people use. And I use only historic references here, but the what he is looking for is leverage. And I think when you see he's defined it based on success, all of those businesses share a major piece, and that's the underlying technology, the use of advanced computing. In his cases, it's probably a lot of supercomputing technology that is based on the NVIDIA type use, which obviously has aspects of what many people would call machine learning or artificial intelligence. And so there I see he's got these businesses that look differently: autonomous driving, robotics, Neuralink, but they all funnel back to, I wonder how he learned how to land a rocket from space in the clutches of and the rocket being 15 stories high,
Right.
a building like a skyscraper type rocket. And so he has a huge vision here that's way bigger than most of us can even probably effectively conceive. And just to prove that, may I show you what he has in mind for Mars travel?
Please go ahead. Yes.
Okay. I'm going to share my screen here for just a second and show a video that describes, and it's down here, Deirdre. I'm going to show this and let it play and let you see what he has in mind in case those of you listening haven't seen this.
This is how the trip would be made. Starship is lifted into orbit by the Super Heavy booster, which then comes back to Earth. It meets up with another Starship, configured as a tanker, in order to refuel in Earth's orbit before making the long journey to the Red Planet. The booster isn't required for the return, since there's no deep gravity well to escape from on Mars. Starship flies solo, fueled by locally produced methane. So the entire Starship system is fully reusable.
So that's what he has in mind.
Yeah.
And it's a huge vision.
Mhm.
But when you look at what he is doing, everything he's doing here, you can see he's going to need robotics. He's going to need, you know, his concept. For those who have not studied Neuralink, it's worth studying Neuralink. I mentioned this to you.
Right.
What he's doing with Neuralink is helping reestablish electrical connections that have been broken in human bodies, meaning that have been severed between the brain and the spinal cord. So putting back into place things that don't exist anymore, but did exist at one point. So this is that's the first step. So the first patients are about reestablishing some form of connection to allow somebody to do something again. Sight is one of those objectives. And so that's the purpose of Neuralink. And so his whole point is about healing something. And he said, will there be advancements in the use of that capability to improve things like human sight or human cognition? He said, yes, but that's not why I'm doing this. I'm doing this to fix quality of life. That's what he says. I'm not making a judgment here. I'm just telling you what he says the objective is, and it appears to be where he's headed with it, at least initially. That involved a tremendous amount of supercomputing work, obviously. Same thing with SpaceX for the rocket flights. Just the execution of Starlink, and then the autonomous driving, which autonomous driving is as difficult as anything we've tried. And what he's done now with SpaceX is proved he can drive in 3 dimensions, right? Autonomously, and land a rocket Now it's not dealing with hazards and all that, but he's learning that through the cars. So he's got an interesting way of thinking about accomplishing based on fundamentals.
Mhm.
And it leads you into incredible territory. What it means for people like us, I think, is it's a couple of different things that are helping us as we're dealing with leading in this digital age. I think the first one, Deirdre, is really a clear definition of what constitutes success.
Yes.
What constitutes success? And you see, for him, his definition of success is very high up there. I mean, it's way up on the Maslow scale, right? I mean, it's
Right.
way up, and it's not down at the functionality. It's way beyond functionality, at least as he expresses it, which makes it much more difficult to execute.
Mhm.
As you and I both know, when you start to try to come down to, okay, how do I reverse engineer this and accomplish it? He's got to create a vision like the one I just showed you to say, human life is fragile. Human life on the earth is even more fragile. So I need to transplant that life to another place that doesn't have that allows me a better chance of survivability of that fragility. But I can't go to the nearest platform, which would be the moon, because that would likely be affected by anything that catastrophically happens on Earth and might also affect the moon. And as a result, I really haven't gained anything other than perhaps a little bit of time. Where if I can establish life on another planet, I have a better chance of the survivability of human life.
Mhm.
And then I think if you pushed it further, he'd talk about Neuralink is the beginnings of the sustainability of the quality of that life. Right. And I'm just beginning at a very low level. And I'm inferring a lot here, Deirdre. So now I know you and I have talked about this. You haven't pushed back on me on this yet, but
Right.
I believe that's what you'd be seeing. So he's pulling back all of this stuff into saying, how can I use what I have today? And what would be that one step that gets me the first executable step in that direction? We talk about this when we talk about the difference between a mission and a vision, right?
Right.
That the mission is your job to get to the vision, but the vision may be way many more steps than your first mission. And in his case, I heard him say that his first mission was to get the returnable rocket. The next thing he's working on is refueling in space. And I mentioned this to you the other day. It makes a whole lot more sense when you see his video
Mhm.
that articulates how that becomes an aspect. But that's how he thinks. That now my next step is to not only refine that, but I've got to figure out this refueling in space thing and how that's going to work. Um, and so I think that's how you might be able to take and look at this incredible, whether you believe it or not, and whether you believe he can achieve it or not is a whole different issue, and whether you believe he's been funded by the government to do it or he's doing it himself. I'm not trying to get it. You and I are not trying to get into any of that. We're trying to get into the thought about leadership because he is accomplishing something that's very difficult to do. And how is he doing that? And I believe he's using the same principles we talk about. He's assessing his view of where things are today and where he thinks they're going to be in the future. He is putting together a vision, and then he's pulling it back to, okay, what are those steps I need? What's the mission I need? And then what's my strategy to go after the mission? And I think in that strategy, he's looking at key leverage points. And for him, I believe it is supercomputing, the use of advanced computing to help me execute a, a, a plethora of things that will get me next to the next steps as I proceed on this journey. So with that, I'm going to stop and let you take over from here and try to make sense of the mess I just made.
Well, as you said earlier, you and I are going to delve into this whole issue of leadership in the digital age because there are so many fascinating aspects to it. But I do want to comment on one aspect given what you've just been saying. It may be that technology companies approach goal setting in a different way from business people operating in other industries. It may be that you have to think about technology accomplishment as something, achieving something beyond what I'll call your standard business goals. And this is what's so interesting, and this is what we will really get into maybe in our next weekly briefing. But where does this leave what I'll call your standard business leader? Your standard business leader has to accomplish business goals, has to meet the demands of customers, has to operate in the marketplace, in a business ecosystem, has to deliver results, both financial results to satisfy Wall Street and product and service results to satisfy customers and so forth. So it may be, though, that when a leader, a standard business leader, is thinking about using one of these advanced technologies in the business, they have to approach the goal setting in a slightly different way. Maybe the goal setting is not simply for what I'll call business results, but it starts to get into some of these aspirational results. I think we've seen over and over again that the big tech leaders we've heard of all think in terms of aspirational results. And I'll go back to Paul Allen and Bill Gates developing their first operating system. That was aspirational. It wasn't for what I'll call a standard business goal. And certainly people like Steve Jobs and now Tim Cook and Microsoft and Google and so forth, they're all working aspirationally, even though they expect businesses to pick up on what they're creating and use it in business. That's how these companies make their money. So they need to connect the aspirational with business goals. By and large, and this gets back to the question of motivations, Tom, it may be that it's the business leader who needs to align motivations because the tech companies, with their aspirational goals, cannot themselves work in terms of business goals. I don't know if this is true. This is something for the two of us to take apart, but this is, I believe, something that business leaders need to take into account when approaching some of the rhetoric talk in the tech world these days. Oh, everyone has to use Gen AI, or oh, quantum computing is coming. Are you ready for it? And so forth. I believe, and I think you do too, that the goals are still aspirational for those two technologies. Now, there are some advanced technologies that have already proven themselves: robotics, data analytics, machine learning driven algorithms driving insights that can be used in business and so forth. So that we're at the point where business goals can be assigned to these technologies. We're still waiting for the use cases to be able to assign business goals to certainly Gen AI, certainly quantum computing, and so forth, beyond the aspiration of their technology company developers. It's a fascinating way to start to think about what is happening in the technology world. And this ties back to what I was saying a little earlier. I think most business leaders are starting to think about, okay, I'm hearing about these technologies. I've got to understand them, and I've got to figure out whether I can use them. This is actually part of the mindset of a leader that you and I do a lot of talking about. Any good leader with a productive mindset is going to acknowledge these new technologies and start to think about them. But again, because they are something different, it may be that they do have to establish some sort of partnership or relationship to be able to use them. And then certainly once you bring it down to the practical aspect, and now I'm tying back to where we started with NASA connecting with SpaceX, probably because of infrastructure, people, cost, capabilities, processes, and so forth. Certainly, once a leader starts to actually implement these technologies, odds are they're going to have to connect with others to help them with this. But all of this requires deep, clear, strategic thinking. And it requires a very clear assessment of what's going on in the marketplace right now. What are you missing? What are the motivations? What's the time factor here? Can I wait for a year while some of this sorts itself out? Or do I have to even start acting now? By and large, I think most people can wait a year, but that's something that's aside. That's an assessment that every leader has to make. Then you get to the decide questions, which are, do I have the resources? And this is going to be a sticking point for many people, I believe, for many leaders. What outcomes do I want? We're not at a point where we can assess outcomes to some of these advanced technologies. And then what's the plan? We can't even establish plans. There are no use cases, beyond the technologies that I mentioned as already in place. So this becomes a fascinating interaction between the advanced technologies and the movement of tech companies, and then our organizing structure, which is used to support the work of business leaders today. This is why, for me, and I know for you, SpaceX and Starlink are just such fascinating companies and capabilities to assess. And I've got to, one more point here is that we have to acknowledge that it's not just in space where this constellation of companies is filling in for the government. It's also in communications in places like hurricane damaged Western North Carolina, where Starlink is providing the infrastructure for communication. The same over in Ukraine, where Starlink is creating the communications infrastructure in a war-torn zone and so forth. So it just may be that the government, with its processes and current capabilities, may increasingly need to call in technology companies with advanced capabilities to do some basic work of government. And here I'll stop again, Tom, and maybe let you take the last word here.
So I want to come back to the point about accomplish, and this is about delivering something. And I think when you and I talk about use cases for these technologies, we talk about them creating the delivery.
Correct.
Meaning they create this podcast. They don't do that today.
Yeah.
Could they? Maybe. But what we are doing is we're employing these technologies. We're employing AI models to create transcripts, to create summaries, to create highlights, to point to minute summary points along the way of these things. So we're employing these technologies today, but it's not delivering the end result. And if you think about how Elon Musk is doing that here, he's not delivering the end result with these things. He is using them as a way to get that thing done that he envisions, that he has created and envisioned. And where you and I are on these use cases, and we don't want to have people misunderstand when we talk use cases. We're talking use cases of let it be creative and give you that hugely creative answer. No, that's coming out of a human brain right now, and we just gave it to you on a video. And he has figured out the steps to get there. We're not seeing that kind of a use case right now. What we are seeing is that these technologies can give you this. A lot of the underlying programming is being done by models, AI models being used by advanced programmers. So you and I know that this is occurring. What we're talking about is that major leap in creative use case that's going to provide that next massive thing where it can deliver a product to us, as opposed to a very that has itself as a thing, right? There are major uses of this technology going on today, and that's where good leaders, you and I think, have to spend their time. They have to understand that distinction is it's not going to deliver that creative answer for you. What it can do today is, in a limited way, provide you a way to make a step toward it. And even with Elon Musk, you see, it's only one aspect of a step toward it. And it's not the actual step. That's still being done by human beings, by engineers, by construction people, by mechanical engineers. It's being delivered at that level still, because we don't see the use case that's going to replace all of those. What we do see is helping getting there and increasing the speed in doing it. And that's the distinction that we're trying to make and let you see, is it's that you have deconstructed that to that point you want to reach next along that vision. You've deconstructed it, and you've then figured out, how can I use the existing technologies to help me accomplish the steps that will get me there? And that's the difficult part of this. And the whole purpose behind today was to take something we saw in the news, which is we do these weekly briefings based on currency, the delivery of the Starlink technology to help enable and fill gaps where they exist, to help in the improving something that was broken, and how to take that thought process and give you a way to think about the leadership behind that, and how that you can see where that might fit into the SpaceX and might fit the definition of success, not only on the business side, but on the personal side of the leader. And we'll be taking each one of these apart in more great detail.
Yes.
We probably confused the heck out of everybody this morning. You and I spent hours talking this stuff through, but we wanted to get people thinking about this subject, because there's a lot here, and it's really important for good, serious technology leaders to start thinking about this. Again, this is opinions of one and two. It's more about just a way that you can take and look at this. And so, Deirdre, with that, I'm going to say it's always a pleasure.
Always a pleasure, Tom.